Along with lighting, color correction, and color grading are easily one of the top ways that you can elevate your video production, but with so much going on in this subject, it can be incredibly overwhelming. Entire careers are dedicated to color correction and color grading, and as a videographer, you're just expected to know how to do these things. I believe that the best way to accentuate these skills is to stack little incremental steps one by one over time so that you can have a deep bag of tricks that you can pull from when it comes time to color correct. In this video, I'm going to give you 3 tips that I use in nearly every single color correction that I do. Let's get it started.
All about export every day.
Internet, welcome back. It's your boy Robert Teegarden here again with another video. Today we're talking about the 3 color correction tips that I use in nearly every video production that I have. If you're new here, welcome. I post content on a regular basis on filmmaking tips and the business of being a creative. But without further ado, let's jump on into Premiere and I'll show you exactly what I use for these 3 tips. So now we're in Premiere and I am using Colorista to color this, but I'm going to show you a bunch of techniques that you can use just with the Lumetri panel as well. Now my assumption here is that what you're using is you've got your scopes together and you're shooting a log image that you've taken from whatever camera that you're using, Canon, Sony, Nikon, whatever, but you're shooting a log image, although these techniques will still work with a regular native profile. And you've brought that log image from log up to Rec 709. And so that's what I've done over here. And as you can tell, if I click on this thing, we're going to be able to see here are my scopes of a Rec 709 image. If I go back down and we'll take off Colorista, you'll see that everything gets massively compressed. So bringing your log image up to Rec 709 is really just filling out this luminance color space right here and expanding what the color space looks like, both in your vector scopes, your RGB waveforms, and your Luma waveforms, okay? So I'm gonna turn that back on and you'll see exactly what happens to the image. It goes from being a very flat gray image into having some color, some contrast, and some saturation. And a couple of things I always like to talk about is that my shadow areas down here and over on this side, my shadow areas are touching the 0 line. My skin tones and kind of the orangey yellow tones right here are going to be around that 60 to 80 range. Usually they sit in this 70 range right here. Now that's based off of the Ansel Adams skin tone scale. I've done videos on this before. You guys can check those things out. But basically, the darker the skin tone, the closer to 60 they are. The lighter the skin tone, the closer to 80 they are. But that's where things sit. However, with this image, it leaves a lot to be desired. Now, outside of the kind of shallow depth of field that I'm getting shooting on this A6600 that lives in my office, which is an APS-C sensor, so it's not crazy blown out in terms of the bokeh. There's really not a ton of separation between me and the background. It's all kind of the same luminance. There's no real hair light, no kickers, any of those sorts of things. So the first thing I always do is set what we would call a vignette. And the way that I do that here in Colorista is by adding a second Colorista layer and a mask. So let's do that right now. I'm gonna go into my effects control and I'm gonna go underneath this Colorista layer. I'm gonna put one down and I'll name this my base grade, right? And then we'll name this an abbreviation of a vignette right here. That's what we're gonna do. And so now I wanna click on this little ellipse mask tool and I'm gonna kind of create this mask around my head and I pull it out this way. And I'm just gonna basically mask around me in the frame, okay? And kind of make it, you know, about there seems good. We've got our little friend, the FX6 over there. Say hi, buddy. And then I'm gonna pull and feather this mask out a ton, way more than you would think, okay? And we're gonna see exactly what that looks like in just a second. Now, the other more important part of this is that you actually have to invert the mask. If I don't invert the mask and I start pulling the shadow areas down, it's actually just gonna pull the shadow area down around me, because that's where the mask is. But if I flip it and invert it, it's going to do the opposite. And it's going to pull down the shadows around the mask that we've put in place, effectively creating our own vignette that we've put together. So I'm gonna invert the mask right there. And I'm gonna take this shadow region here on my dials, and I'm gonna start to pull down the shadow area around the mask that we put. Now this is pretty aggressive and extreme. I'm kind of doing that on purpose. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna click off so you don't see the mask that we've created, but you do see the nice feathered edge that we've got here. It's not this crazy harsh transition. And I'm gonna click this vignette off and you'll see, I'm gonna click it on, and click it off, and I'll click it on. And so you can see by leaving that vignette on, I'm getting a decent amount of separation between myself and the image in the background. Now, really, that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to create separation and interest between the background and the subject. And so creating vignettes, more effectively masking the subject out and creating a vignette, gives you a ton of control in terms of how you do that. There are native settings in every color correction software that would allow you just to create these vignettes, and they're fine. And what they do is just kind of take the corners in. But we want to be able to accentuate the exact subject that we want to. Creating a mask vignette is the perfect way of doing that. So that's tip number one, creating a mask vignette. I always do that. The next thing I want to talk about is my skin. Now, this skin tone could be fine. It's not great. It's not terrible. But what we want to do is really create some sort of a mask around my skin, or really we want to key out my skin. Now, there's a couple ways that I could do this. If I go over to the Lumetri panel, one of the ways I do this often is I'll go into my curves and I'll go into hue versus hue. I've talked about this in videos before, and I'll click on this color picker and I'll kind of tap on what my skin looks like. And I'll do another little trick just so I can see what's going on. I'm actually going to create a mask around my skin tone so that the only thing we see is here. I'm going to go back to my Lumetri scopes, and this line right here on our vector scope, that's our skin tone line. And it's a very important skin tone line. And right now, the objective is to get this little sliver of color to live on top of that line. And you can see that we're way off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to my hue versus hue. I'm going to click shift and I'm going to hit this little button with my cursor or with my mouse. I'm going to pull that color down. Now, as you can see what's going on in my vector scope, it's actually starting to consolidate the color on the skin tone line. And I haven't actually moved my hue v hue graph that much at all. It just kind of pulled it down just slightly. So now let's go back and we'll take off this mask right here. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and delete the mask. And we can see it's a little green for my taste. It's a little green for my taste, but if we go down and we say Lumetri color here, we click it off, it's red, on it's green, off it's red, on it's green. And like I said, this is a little too green for my taste. So I'm gonna go back and make a little bit of an adjustment here and pull it back in. And that seems pretty good. That's a good place to start. Now that's the way I can do it inside the Lumetri panel. Another way, but that doesn't actually take care of any of the luminance values, meaning how bright is my skin. I could go back and use the Lumetri color to do that as well. But what I want to do is I want to create a key. And so I'm going to show you another way that I do this. I'm going to take another version of Colorista. I'm going to put this Colorista on the top. I'm going to rename this one for skin. And now what we're going to do is we're going to actually generate a key here. Now keys are really effective. Most color correction software has them. The Colorista one is very robust, although there's a great one that lives inside of Lumetri as well. I'm going to hit edit, and you're going to see here's our log image over here. This is the source, and this is what the matte is. So exactly what we're doing. So these color selection tools are really helpful for me. And this one right here kind of gives me a way of creating a broad selection. So I want my skin tone. I'm going to create a box around my skin. And what it's doing is that anything that's in white is what the key is going to affect. Anything that's black, the key won't affect. So you can see that we have kind of some complementary colors over here. And that's not what we want. We won't want to affect those areas. So I'm going to try and get rid of some of these areas over here and kind of darken that key on that side. And it's helping out, it's working really well. I'm gonna go back in and make sure that we can get some of these areas on the top of my bald ass head. But you can see there's kind of this balancing act that's going on between selecting my skin, which is what we want, but actually taking away some of the background. Now there's a couple other tips that we want to use. We can use these clipping tools right here. And as I kind of bring this up, it'll say, oh, we're actually don't want those luminance values here. And you can see my skin is being left alone as I'm pulling these clipping tools up. I'm going to pull my highlights down a little bit too. Actually, that's not really helping us out too much. The more I pull the highlights in, you see the more it's being corrected. So I'm going to keep pulling this up so that we don't have these things. But again, I'm getting good areas on my face. I kind of slowly start to bring that stuff in here. And then I'm going to soften the mask, or the key rather, and kind of leave it there. I'm going to get a little bit onto my arm. Pull this down just a little bit. And again, a little bit goes a long way in these instances. And so now I'm going to say that's a decent key. It's not the best one, but it's a decent key. Again, I have my skin and the lamps over here, kind of complementary tones. That's okay. That happens. We did our best in the time that we're given. And now that I have this key here, I can actually start to brighten my skin just slightly, not crazy, because I can go like over the top with it and you can see what happens. That looks like possessed, kind of crazy. But I just want to lift the levels of my skin just a little bit, just to add a little punch where my skin is concerned, right? I think that's just a little too much. Let's go back down. And then I can also, remember I said it looked a little green? I can also go up here. My Colorista, this is my first Colorista version or plugin, and I say I actually want this to go a little red, just a tiny bit, just a tiny bit. So now I'm looking at that, and that looks okay. I'm satisfied with that result, especially for a quick YouTube result here. You can see there's kind of this like moraying or fringing over here. I don't love that. Let's see if we can go and take care of that. Now that we've done that, I'm gonna go back into my key. I'm gonna deselect this thing here. I'm gonna slowly bring that down. Add in a little bit more over here, and you can see it's always just a balancing act. We always have a balancing act here. See if I clip this a little bit more. Make this out just a little bit, slow. And all I'm doing is I'm just holding the mouse down and wiggling my cursor just a little bit. That one was a little too much, so I'm gonna undo. I'm gonna come back. Boom, there we go. Now watch. Let's look at our image as I clip this on and off. Darker, lighter, darker, lighter, right? Not bad, right? But again, let's look at where we started from. Let's clean all of these things off. This is our base image right here that came out of log. I'm gonna click on just the base grade that brought us to Rec 709. Not bad. I mean, a lot of people could leave that and it would be okay. But then we added a vignette, right? To give some separation and some depth. Boom, here's the vignette already 1,000 times better. This thing is already looking great. And then I wanna just pop on a little bit of skin tone here, bring it up, and now you can see again, there's just a ton of separation that's happening. And what we started off, which is just like a meh kind of image. It's not terrible, it's not great. A lot of YouTube stuff looks fine, just looking at that stuff. There's a lot of video projects that I see that are out in the world that look just like this. But now we actually have added some separation into what's going on. Now, the third technique that I wanna show you guys again is with the keyer, and it has to do with color, but in kind of a different sense. Now, let's just say that this shirt color isn't really working for us, and we want to add something in that's a little bit different. I'm gonna add another Colorista layer here. I'm gonna rename this one to shirt. Actually, I'm gonna rename it to Sahirt. Apparently, I'm speaking a new language with you guys. I'm gonna go back over here, and I'm gonna edit in my key. And now this time I'm gonna use the same one, but the selection is going to be my shirt. Same type of techniques that we were talking about earlier. I'm gonna get in here, I'm gonna kind of clip some of this stuff out, bring the highlight area down some, and we just wanna get rid of all this kind of noise and the chatter that's in here, all right? Boom, see if we can't select a little bit more. Yep. Not too bad. Okay, so for the purpose of what we got going on, that's a decent key, but I want to show you what happens when I start playing with the hue here. Watch what happens to the color of my shirt. Everything else is kind of the same, but based off of what key we got going on, now all of a sudden I've got a green shirt. I'm going to crank this thing all the way to the other side. I've got a completely different color, like kind of mauve or army green. You can pull it around. I got a little bit more of a purple shirt. Now I can move my saturation in and out and make myself have a gray little bit of shirt. Now this thing becomes incredibly helpful for times where you have different shots and different lighting compositions, and so the keys in the background and things look slightly different, or you just need to swap out a color entirely. Using a key and the hue shift back and forth is an excellent way of doing that. So as you can see, I've added separation between me and my background by using a vignette. I've popped my skin color by using keyers. I can even change the color of various elements inside my frame by using the keyer as well. And with those three techniques, I feel like you're going to be able to separate yourself from most average novice color correctors that are there. Now again, we're not talking about color grading. I'm not talking about putting different elements on there. I'm simply talking about ways of making your image pop more. And if you're interested in figuring out the entire way of how I color corrected that, you should check out this video over here. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for posting notifications, because this is Robert Teegarden with another video in the can, ladies and germs. I'll see you guys next week with another one. Peace.